I found secret treasure under the sea. Some people spend their whole lives searching for treasure. For me and my partner Danny, treasure hunting wasn't just a dream. It was our job. We had spent the last 3 years scouring the ocean floor, chasing old maps, cryptic legends, and whatever scraps of information we could find. Most of the time, we ended up with nothing. Just sand, rusted debris, and the occasional broken artifact. But this time, we struck gold. The location was off the coast of Cuba, in a part of the ocean that wasn't on any official dive maps. We had pieced together the coordinates from an old Spanish journal, written by a sailor who had survived a shipwreck over 300 years ago. According to the journal, the ship had been carrying something valuable, a secret cargo meant for the Spanish crown. But a storm took it down, and for centuries, it had remained hidden beneath the waves. Until now, Danny and I suited up, adjusting our oxygen tanks as we sat on the edge of our small boat, staring down into the deep blue abyss below. The sun shimmered on the water's surface, the waves gentle and calm. I checked my wrist computer, oxygen levels full, depth gauge working. Everything was good. Danny grinned at me, adjusting his mask. "You ready to be rich?" I smirked. "Let's find out." We rolled off the boat and descended into the deep. At 150 feet, the ocean was still bright. Schools of fish darted past, and the coral-covered seafloor stretched into the distance. But we had to go deeper. At 250 feet, the sunlight faded. Shadows loomed over the rocky formations, and the water grew cold. I adjusted my headlamp, scanning the ocean floor as we moved carefully between jagged rocks. Then, at 320 feet, I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. Beneath us, half buried in the sand, was a ship. Not just any ship. An enormous Spanish galleon, its wooden frame still mostly intact, its hull covered in centuries of coral growth. Danny's voice crackled through the radio. "Holy, do you see this?" "Yeah," I whispered, my heart pounding. We found it. We had spent years chasing ghost stories, but this was real, and inside that wreck lay the treasure of a lifetime. Excitement surged through me as we approached the shipwreck, our flashlights cutting through the murky depths. The galleon rested at an angle, its bow partially buried in the sand, its massive masts broken and swaying gently with the deep sea currents. The name was still faintly visible on the side, written in faded Spanish lettering, La Fortuna. Danny let out a low whistle. The Fortune. Couldn't have picked a better name. We swam toward the main deck, careful not to disturb the loose debris. Our fins kicked up clouds of silt, making it harder to see, but there was no mistaking what lay ahead. A shattered cargo hold, its wooden beams split open, and inside, gold, coins, jewelry, ornate goblets, all gleaming beneath layers of sand and coral. Danny's breathing became heavy through the radio. Jackpot. I reached for a gold coin, brushing away the dirt. It felt heavy, real. The markings were old, the edges worn, but this wasn't just history. This was worth millions. Danny grabbed a small chest, prying it open to reveal pearls the size of marbles. His laughter crackled in my earpiece. "Man, we are going to be legends." A sudden boom cut him off. The ocean shook. The silt around us exploded into a thick cloud, blinding us. I grabbed onto a nearby beam, my heart hammering as a powerful current rushed past us. Danny shouted through the radio, "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer, because through the swirling debris, something moved. Not a fish, not a shark, something human, a diver. And not one of us. Danny saw it too. "Jack, we have company." Another diver appeared, just beyond the wreck, their black wetsuit blending with the deep. Their mask reflected the gold, hiding their face. Then another and another. 4 of them, armed. "Jack," Danny whispered, "this isn't good." My mind raced. How had they found us? Had they been tracking us, watching us? One of the divers raised a spear gun, pointing it directly at us. I grabbed Danny's arm. "We need to move. Now." But before we could react, the first shot fired. A spear slammed into the wooden beam next to me, barely missing my leg. We kicked off the wreck, propelling ourselves backward as the attackers closed in. The ocean was no longer silent. It was a battlefield. Danny and I darted behind the cargo hold, using the wreck for cover. My breath came fast and shallow, my oxygen supply ticking down. The attackers weren't here to talk. They were here to steal our discovery, and if we weren't careful, we'd be joining the wreck. Danny and I kicked off the wreck, pushing ourselves deeper into the ruins as the rival divers closed in. The water around us was thick with swirling sand and debris, making it nearly impossible to see. A second spear shot whizzed past, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't have time to think. We had to run. "Move, move, move," I shouted into the radio, grabbing Danny's arm. We weaved through the wreckage, using the fallen beams and shattered planks as cover. The weight of the ocean pressed against my chest, making every movement slower, every breath precious. I stole a glance behind us. The attackers were gaining. Their black wetsuits blended into the deep, their movements sharp and aggressive. They were trained, experienced. This wasn't just some group of rogue divers. We were dealing with professionals, and they wanted us dead. We reached the stern of the shipwreck, where the deck had collapsed inward, leaving a narrow opening beneath the wooden beams. A tight squeeze, but our only chance. Danny hesitated. We won't fit with the gear. We don't have a choice. I yanked off my oxygen tank, slinging it through the gap first. Danny did the same, forcing himself into the narrow passage. My chest scraped against the wood, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. For a terrifying moment, I was stuck. I sucked in my stomach, twisting my body sideways, and pushed through. Danny was already on the other side, gasping for air through his emergency breather. We grabbed our tanks and took off again. The moment we emerged, the ocean opened up into a deep trench, a sheer drop, hundreds of feet straight down. Danny and I exchanged a glance. There was no turning back. We had to jump. We kicked hard, diving into the abyss. Just as another spear shot exploded through the water above us, the trench swallowed us whole, dragging us deeper into the unknown. The light from our flashlights flickered, barely piercing the darkness. Below us, the ocean stretched into infinite blackness, the weight of the deep pulling at our bodies. I checked my wrist computer. Our oxygen was running low. We had 10 minutes. If we didn't figure something out fast, we were going to die down here. So we dove deeper in the sea, and the deeper we went, the quieter it became. No more weapons firing, no rival divers chasing us, just the emptiness of the ocean. But something felt wrong. The water wasn't still. It hummed, vibrating around us like a silent current that wasn't coming from the sea. Danny's voice crackled through the radio. "Jack, do you hear that?" I nodded. The water's moving, not like a normal current. This was something else, something alive. A faint glow appeared in the distance. At first, I thought it was bioluminescent algae, the kind that shimmered in deep-sea caves. But as we swam closer, I realized the light was coming from below us. We reached the bottom of the trench, and we saw it. It wasn't just a shipwreck. It was an entire structure. Massive stone pillars jutted from the ocean floor, carved with ancient symbols that pulsed with a dim blue light. The sand had swallowed most of it, but I could see arches, staircases, doorways leading into the unknown. This wasn't just treasure. This was a sunken city. Danny hovered next to me, his flashlight shaking. "Jack," he whispered, "what the hell is this?" I had no answer, but I knew one thing. This place had been hidden for a reason, and we weren't supposed to find it. Before I could speak, a shadow moved in the ruins below. Not a fish, not a diver, something bigger, something watching us. Then, the whispers started, soft at first, like a voice carried by the currents, then louder, more urgent. The words were incomprehensible, but I understood their meaning. "Leave." Now Danny grabbed my arm. "Jack, we need to go." I barely heard him because I wasn't in control of my body anymore. Something was pulling me forward, dragging me toward the ruins. I tried to resist, but my limbs felt heavy, my vision blurring. Then I saw it, a shadowy figure emerging from the shadows of the city. My body wasn't my own. Something was pulling me forward, an invisible force, dragging me toward the ruins. My limbs felt heavy, my head foggy, like I was dreaming underwater. The whispers wrapped around my skull, their voices soft but insistent. They spoke in a language I didn't know, yet somehow I understood. "Come, see, remember." Danny grabbed my arm, his voice frantic through the radio. "Jack, snap out of it." I tried to fight it, but my legs kicked forward on their own. I drifted toward the glowing structure, my hands reaching out as if I had been here before. Then, the shadows moved. A figure emerged from the ruins, tall, humanoid, but wrong. Its body was elongated, too thin, its limbs swaying with the currents like seaweed. It had no eyes, just a smooth face, covered in faint glowing patterns, shifting like ink in water. Danny cursed. "Jack, we need to go. Now." I couldn't move, because the creature raised its arm and pointed at me. The ocean around us shuddered, the currents twisting violently. The water felt thicker, like it was turning into something alive. And then, in the distant ruins, more figures stepped forward. Not one, not two, dozens, all watching, all waiting. We had to move. I forced my arm to work, grabbing Danny's vest and yanking him backward. The moment I broke free, the whispers turned into a roar. The ocean screamed. A current hit us like a freight train, slamming us into the side of the sunken structure. My vision blurred as sand and debris exploded around us. I kicked hard, forcing my way upward. Danny was right behind me, his flashlight swinging wildly. The figures closed in. They didn't swim. They just drifted forward, like the ocean itself was carrying them. I reached for my flare gun, my fingers shaking. It wasn't a weapon, but maybe, just maybe, it would buy us time. I fired. The red flare exploded into the darkness, lighting up the ruins in a hellish glow. For a brief second, I saw them clearly. They weren't just creatures. They were wearing armor, ancient, ornate, like soldiers from a forgotten time. But it was their faces that made my blood run cold. They weren't an alien. They were human. Or at least, they had been once. Danny and I shot upward, kicking hard, pushing against the crushing water. The trench's edge was just ahead. If we could reach it, we had a chance. Our oxygen tanks were low. We had minutes left, but the ocean wasn't letting us go. The figures below us didn't follow. They didn't have to, because the water itself changed. The trench closed, not physically, but something shifted in the water. The surface felt farther away, the depth gauge flickering again. 350 feet, 400 feet, 500 feet. Danny gasped, his breathing ragged. "Jack, what's happening?" I had no answer. We had been ascending, but the ocean was dragging us down. A sound rumbled through the deep, a vibration, a voice. The city below was waking up. The glowing symbols pulsed, their light growing stronger. The ruined towers and broken archways shifted, rearranging like they were alive. Then, something massive moved beneath us. The sand erupted, a cloud of blackness swallowing everything below. And from that darkness, something rose, something too big to be real. I barely saw it, just the outline of an impossible shape, shifting like liquid. Too many arms, too many mouths. I felt it, in my bones, in my mind. A presence so old, so powerful, that my thoughts weren't my own anymore. It was waiting. It had always been waiting. For us. Danny screamed, "Jack, we have to get out of here." I forced myself to focus. The trench was collapsing. We had seconds left. I reached for my emergency lift bag, ripping the valve open. The compressed air exploded, shooting me upward like a rocket. Danny did the same. We shot upwards, fighting against the current, our emergency lift bags hauling us toward the surface. My lungs burned. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Danny was right beside me, his eyes wild, his body tense. We had escaped the horror, but the real danger was still out there. At 200 feet, I forced myself to slow down. Ascending too fast could cause decompression sickness. If we weren't careful, our blood would turn into a bubble-filled nightmare. Danny knew it too. He grabbed my arm, signaling with his fingers, "Slow down." I nodded, and we stopped at our first decompression stop, hovering in place. The darkness below us felt heavy, but I forced myself to focus. I checked my oxygen gauge low, but still enough. We had 5 minutes before we could rise again. 5 minutes. In open water, Danny's voice crackled through the radio. "You think we lost them?" I wanted to believe it, but I knew better. At 150 feet, we saw the first light, a faint beam cutting through the water, moving in slow, deliberate sweeps. Flashlights, old crappy divers. Danny swore under his breath. "They're still here." Our rivals, the black-suited divers who had ambushed us near the wreck. They had lost sight of us when we dropped into the trench, but now they were searching. And if they found us first, they wouldn't hesitate to take us out. I tapped my dive knife, feeling its weight against my thigh. We weren't just swimming for our lives anymore. We were being hunted. Danny and I kept still, watching the rival divers glide through the water. There were 3 of them now, scanning the area, their spear guns ready. They had no idea we were just below them. I motioned to Danny, "Stay low, move slow." If we could stay out of their sight, we still had a chance. We angled ourselves toward the wreckage of an old plane, half buried in the sand nearby. The corroded metal would block their sonar, give us cover. Danny's breathing was shaky in my earpiece. "Jack, we can't fight them down here." He was right. We were already low on air, outnumbered and outgunned. The only way to win this was to reach the surface first. But the problem? Even if we made it up there, they had a boat, and we didn't. We swam slowly through the wreckage, using the shadows to keep hidden. The divers were still above us, their flashlights cutting through the water. Then, a shadow passed overhead. Not a diver, not a fish, a boat. Danny stiffened. "Is that ours?" I squinted, and with the help of my special gear, I somehow managed to make out the shape through the water. But as the boat drifted closer, I saw the familiar outline of a rifle resting on the railing. It wasn't ours, it was theirs. My stomach twisted. We weren't just dealing with rogue divers. This was a professional operation, and if they had a boat up there, They were waiting for us to surface. Danny grabbed my arm, his voice urgent. We can't go up. They'll kill us the second we breach. I clenched my jaw. We were running out of options, running out of air. Then I saw it, a red cylinder, floating just above us. One of our spare oxygen tanks. It must have come loose during the chase. If we could get to it, we could buy ourselves time. But we had to move fast. I signaled to Danny, "Follow me." We kicked upward, keeping close to the wreckage, our bodies moving slow and controlled. The divers above us were getting impatient. One of them raised a spear gun, scanning the area like they sensed movement. My chest tightened. Just a little farther, I reached out, my fingers brushing the oxygen tank. Then, a loud clang echoed through the water. Danny had bumped the wreckage. The divers above us froze. Then, all at once, they turned their flashlights downward and saw us. The flashlights locked onto us. For half a second, everything was silent. Just the soft hum of the ocean, the slow drift of bubbles escaping our regulators. Then, movement. One of the rival divers raised his spear gun. We had no time to think. Danny grabbed my vest and yanked me sideways, just as the first spear fired past my head. The sharp metal tip sliced through the water, barely missing my tank. We kicked hard, pushing toward the oxygen tank floating above us. Another shot fired. I saw the flash of metal, then a sharp ping as the spear slammed into the wreckage beside us, sending a cloud of rusted debris into the water. Danny reached the spare oxygen tank first. He snatched it, clipped it to his gear, and tossed me the spare breather. "We can't stay down here, Jack." I gritted my teeth. He was right. We had to surface. Now, but with the divers above us ready to kill us on sight, we needed a plan. I scanned our surroundings, my mind racing. The enemy divers were hovering above, positioned between us and the boat. Their own vessel floated at the surface, waiting, but they weren't watching everything. My eyes locked onto one weakness, the old Spanish wreck. It was unstable. If we moved fast, we could use the wreckage to cause a distraction, forcing them to reposition. I grabbed Danny's arm, signaling, "Follow my lead." We swam toward the base of the wreck, where the wooden beams were weakest. I pulled out my dive knife, wedging it between the rotting supports and twisting. A loud crack echoed through the water. The beams buckled. The entire structure groaned. Then, it collapsed. The sudden shift sent a massive cloud of debris into the water, an avalanche of sand and wood surging upward. It was like a deep-sea explosion. For a few seconds, no one could see anything. This was our chance. Danny and I launched upward, using the chaos to make our break for the surface. We kicked hard, breaking through the swirling debris, leaving the wreck behind. I glanced back. The rival divers were still caught in the cloud of silt, their flashlights flickering uselessly. We had seconds before they recovered. The enemy boat loomed above us, its dark hull slicing through the waves. We were close, too close. If they saw us now, a gunshot echoed through the water. I looked up. A figure was leaning over the boat's railing, holding a rifle, and they were already aiming at us. Danny and I breached the surface, gasping for air. The salt water burned my throat, my eyes stinging from the sudden light. The enemy's boat engine rumbled, and I could see two men on board, both armed. One of them shouted something in Spanish. Then, the gun fired. I ducked underwater, the bullet cutting through the waves inches from my head. Danny's voice rang out, "Jack, the boat." I turned. Our own boat was still floating nearby, only 30 feet away. But there was a problem. The enemy boat was moving, straight toward us. They weren't just shooting at us. They were about to run us down. Everything happened at once. The enemy boat surged forward, its weight crashing against my face. Danny and I swam for our lives, the roar of the engine growing louder behind us. 20 feet, 15. I could see the ladder on our boat, just within reach. Danny grabbed the railing, hauling himself up first. I was right behind him. Then, the gun fired again. I felt something whiz past my ear. The shooter was lining up another shot. Danny spun, grabbed the flare gun from our deck, and boom, he fired. The flare shot straight into the enemy boat's engine. A small explosion erupted, flames bursting from the side. The men on board stumbled back, shouting in panic. They had lost control. Their boat veered sharply to the right, missing us by feet as it barreled into the wreckage. A deafening crash rang out as the hull splintered against the ruins below. And just like that, the chase was over. Danny and I lay on the deck, gasping for breath, watching the enemy boat sink into the waves. The men on board were still alive, clinging to debris, shouting for help, but we weren't sticking around. Danny turned to me, his face still pale from adrenaline. "We made it." I nodded. "Yeah, but at what cost?" We had survived. We had escaped, but the treasure, it was still down there. The sun was setting, the ocean calm again, as if nothing had happened. Danny exhaled, shaking his head. So, what now? I stared at the endless horizon, thinking about what we had seen. The wreck, the treasure, the rival divers who had been willing to kill for it. Then I looked down at my hand, at the gold coin I had taken from the wreck. A piece of history, a piece of something bigger. I turned it over in my fingers, listening to the waves. Then, finally, I smiled. Shall we go back?